All right, we have been talking a lot about our relationship with Russia this hour. Another area of the world that brings conflict between Putin and the U.S. is Syria. National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster called for further U.S. action against Russia as punishment for crimes in Syria. Yesterday, he said that Russia is also complicit in Syrian leader President Bashar al-Assad's atrocities and claimed that the Russian government has bombed civilian areas and provided political cover for Assad's crimes. This, as new shocking estimates say that some 400,000 people are believed to have been killed or are missing since the uprising against al-Assad began 7 years ago. Syria is tonight's Flashpoint, and here to discuss that, we are glad to welcome in award-winning journalist and Newsmax contributor, Tara Kangarlou. All right, Tara, the photos and videos coming out of the city of Ghouta in Syria are apocalyptic. The UN Secretary General has said that people living there are living in hell on earth, essentially. What is going on there, and why is that area become such a flashpoint?
Ghouta is a horrendous situation, and thank you for having me to talk about one of the worst humanitarian crises that we are seeing right now in the world. But I want to point out to the fact that this is not the first time that we're seeing such disastrous humanitarian conditions in Syria. Yesterday marked the 7th-year anniversary of this war, and in the last 4 years, we've had Aleppo that undergone the same humanitarian disaster we're seeing in Ghouta, as well as Homs. So now we're dealing with an enclave that Syria's regime, the Assad government, is trying to take back from what they claim are terrorist groups. Whereas the rebels who are there argue against that. So this is a situation, a classic situation, essentially in Syria, where ordinary people, ordinary civilians, are caught up in this fight, where Assad wants to reclaim property, territory, and gain ground, whereas the opposition and the rebel groups are fighting him back. And of course, Assad is being aided by Russia, so you can only imagine the weaponry being used, and that's what we hear from a lot of people on the ground. But this is an ongoing situation, and it really, it's a great point, and I think we are seeing the crisis that is spiraling into an out-of-control situation. Let's look back at what happened about 2.5 weeks ago, when the UN passed a resolution to pass a ceasefire. But what happened? The ceasefire essentially lasted a few hours, not even, and airstrikes and shellings continued. What is key right now is the humanitarian crisis and the evacuation of those in need of medical assistance. Otherwise, the Assad regime is actually entering a lot of the territories in Ghouta and claiming ground. So very little can be done at this point, and U.S. intervention, however that can be, can do, quite frankly, not that much at this point, unless it's in the form of an evacuation, because otherwise it would only spiral into a bigger military conflict, and the people in Syria are really tired of that. Right, and actually you penned a recent article for Newsmax.com titled "The Syrian Women of War-Torn Ghouta Are the Most Resilient on Earth." Who are some of those women, especially the ones you met there, and what inspired you to tell their stories? I spoke to them about 2 weeks ago on International Women's Day, and I covered the Syrian crisis very closely, and also the refugee issue that is essentially suffocating the neighboring countries to Syria. But I think it's very important to point out to the resilience of these people, whether those living inside Syria, but also the refugees living in countries like Lebanon, where I am in right now. And the women in Ghouta, 5 of them who I spoke with, they were all hiding in the only standing hospital in a neighborhood that was a target of constant shelling. And a very poignant moment took place when I was speaking to this mother who studied art and to be an artist in university, and now she was working as a midwife in that facility with very little equipment, with very little medicine. And she told me that every time we go underground, every time we go to the basement of this hospital or their own homes, we feel we are going into our graves. We are walking into our tombs because we don't know if we're going to come out. Wow. And when you hear a mother, a woman, hearing that, saying that, And hearing that from her, it makes you wonder how she maintains her hope. And they all do, and they all smile. This is something that I found quite fascinating over the last 5 years that I've been covering this crisis. They have this profound way of keeping up their hope and being resilient. Right. And I think that's why the international community is responsible, not in a form of military action, because that's just going to escalate the chaos there and bloodshed there, but really in forms of humanitarian aid and stopping the bloodshed and monitoring safe zones and evacuation emergency measures.
Right. Just quickly, I could talk to you all day, but we only have a few seconds left. You and your organization had a party this morning, and there were some photos, some artwork that came out of that you can show us quickly?
Absolutely. I want to talk about what we do at Art of Hope. So I created Art of Hope to work on a very specific issue of trauma and PTSD alleviation among the refugee crisis, because very few organizations are working on that, and every single family that I've met and dealt with and covered this issue around has talked about this, and they're really dealing with trauma and PTSD of war. So this morning we did a birthday party for a group of Syrian refugee children, mainly from Aleppo and Homs in Lebanon, who have been displaced for a couple of years, and their sense of dignity and self-worth and value has been crushed in the status that they have. So we did this birthday party for them to bring back that sense of self-worth and value and love and appreciation, even though they are displaced, even though they are living as refugees. And we asked them to draw their wishes. And it was fascinating that almost all of these children, ranging from the age of 9 to 12, they drew pictures of themselves going back to Syria, pictures of their flag with their parents. This little girl, Zahra, she's age 9. She's from Halab, and again Aleppo. And as I mentioned earlier, undergone the same thing that Ghouta is facing right now. And this little girl, she's from Daraa, and she faced severe trauma the past couple of years, and our organization have been working with her. And she's from Daraa, which was the epicenter of this war that broke 7 years ago. So these children, despite their young age, they understand and they feel and they know that they are away from their home. And I think moving into this 8th year, the Syrian war is uprooting children from their childhood, and it's the bloodshed that needs to stop.
Wow. Tara, thank you so much for the great work you're doing. Thank you for your coverage and your passion. We do appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.